class. All righty, we'd like to call this March 7th meeting of your Newark City Council to order. Holly, please call the roll.
Mr. Cost?
Here.
Mrs. Floyd? Here. Mr. Frazier?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Murmy?
Here.
Mr. Rath?
Here.
Mr. Roletta?
Here.
Mr. Blake?
Here.
And Mr. Buck?
Here. We have all present this evening. Next on the agenda is the invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you please stand? Mr. Johnson.
Let us pray. Lord, as we sense the coming of spring, let us refresh ourselves and start anew to know your will. Be with us in our deliberations. Give us the knowledge to be better servants of the people. Be with those in need, those who have experienced joy, those who work for peace in the world and the nation. And may we ever serve you, we pray. In your name, amen.
Amen. William, you want to start the pledge for me?
Yes, sure would. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you. Next on the agenda this evening, we have caucus. That's the time for council to discuss anything that may be on the agenda tonight they'd like to talk about. Do we have anything? Okay. Next, we have the minutes of our February 16th, 2016 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those? Motion by Mr. Rath.
Second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Thank you. We have one appointment this evening by Mayor Hall appointing Mary Billy to the Combined General Health District Board. Her 5-year term will begin April 1st, 2016 and will expire March 31st, 2021.
Mr. President?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, if I could just say a couple words.
Yes, sir.
We were looking to do a reappointment for a lady named Mary Billy. She's a lifelong resident of Newark. She's been a practicing nurse for 42 years, a graduate of the Good Sam School of Nursing, most of which was in the operating room. She's worked at Licking Memorial Hospital, the Newark Surgery Center, where she served as a clinical administrator and the OR supervisor, and she's currently employed as an OR nurse at Central Ohio Surgical Institute, New Albany. They're active members of St. Paul's Lutheran Church, and she believes people should have a choice in their health care, so she became active years ago in a citizens group for open health care. She continues to work part-time and looks forward to being reappointed to the board. She's been a good asset on there, and her associates on that board would welcome her back.
Thank you, Mayor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. That passes. Thank you. Next, under reports of standing committees, we have two, one from our Finance Committee, one from the Service Committee. Without objection, those will be received and filed. On reports from city officials, we have one from Stephen Johnson, our city auditor, the operating report, the period ending February 29th, 2016, and two from Barb Jobs, our city tax administrator, the income tax reports for a period of February 15th, 2016, and the other ending February 29th, 2016. Without objection, those will be received and filed. Under communications this evening, we have two, one from Judge Higgins and one from the Ohio EPA. The Ohio EPA one is a notice to advise the Mayor and City Council that a permit to discharge into Raccoon Creek was issued to Tectum Inc. at 105 South 6th Street. Again, without objection, those will be received and filed. Next on the agenda tonight, we have comments from citizens. There are two places for citizens' comments. One's now before the legislation, and one is after. Just a reminder, this is not a debate with council. This is just your opportunity to be heard. Anyone like to speak? Mr. Butcher.
My name is Edward William Butcher, 263 Union Street. I just came here this evening. I just noticed some of the streets is really bad, especially my street, Union Street. It's a bit torn up, but I'd see the Union Street fixed. And my friends at Sparks would like to know when Cherry Road is going to get fixed. It's full of potholes. And they would like to know when that new Cherry Road entrance is going to be open. They're just a bit, they can't wait to be opened up real soon. And I'd like to know when the first Strawberry Festival is going to be. The opportunity forecast, mostly sunny, windy, high in the mid, upper 70s, 70 on Wednesday, 70 on Thursday, Saturday. Mostly sunny, high in the mid, upper 70s. I'll get your 10-day top of 10 weather forecast. Oh, fallback, spring forward, the Sunday, March 13th.
Very good. Yeah, be the morning of March 13th. Thank you, Wade. Anyone else for this first section? Mr. Green.
David Green, 1791. Does that help? David Green, 1791, Olympic Court in Newark. I wanted to invite you and the public to a community discussion. The Freedom School is very involved on an ongoing basis in showing films and having speakers and people reading to discuss the issues that they're facing and the problems that communities are raising and the history of those issues, and as well as being informed by local experience and local history, what people know from their own lives. So this Saturday, the 12th of March, at the library, a speaker from Denison University, Dr. Kaboub is his name, he's an economics professor, is going to be giving a talk on what is the living wage in Central Ohio. And I want to invite you all to come to that if you're free. It should be a good discussion, and it's a very important discussion because on the one hand, quite a number of people have become employed, but the jobs that are available, as many of you know, are low wage, part-time, temporary work, and so the level of poverty is actually increased even though the employment is increased, which is not a usual situation. But Dr. Kaboub has done a bunch of research on what it costs to maintain families, and people will be talking from their own experience about that. And so I wanted to invite you all. There's some flyers here. There are probably not quite enough for 12 people here, but if you take one or skip one, or pass them on, whatever you want to do, and you're welcome to come, and so is everybody here. Welcome to come and be involved in those discussions. It's a Saturday at 2 o'clock at the library, the main branch over here on Main Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Anyone else for this first section? We'll move on to ordinances on the first reading, 16-02.
Ordinance 16-02 by Mr. Rath and Mr. Marmee, an ordinance objecting to the annexation of certain territory generally described as being approximately 2 acres more or less located in Newark Township to the city of Newark, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
You've heard the first reading of 16-02, and it is an emergency, so it only gets one reading. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt 16-02.
Motion by Mr. Rath.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bubb. Is there any discussion on 16-02?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
I will make an attempt to explain this. However, if I err in my explanation, I would like to compel the law director to correct me, if you would.
Okay.
This is an ordinance to object to the annexation of this certain piece of property. I made a motion to adopt it because if we simply do not vote on this, it's the same as it's the same as not taking any action, and it automatically passes. It will become annexed. However, if you have an opportunity, if you would like an opportunity to object to the annexation, then this is where you would vote yes. If you have no objections to us annexing this piece of property, you can vote no. I will be voting no on this, and would encourage the rest to do as well.
So if you're not objecting, you vote no to vote yes. Basically.
Yes.
If you're not objecting to annexing this piece of property, you vote no.
Any other discussion? Mr. Law Director, you have
Is that accurate?
It's accurate, and essentially that's caused by the way the statute is written. In essence, if you want the property to annex, you vote no on this. If it fails, that means in essence the city is not taking action, and by default it's annexed into the city.
any other discussion? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Cost?
No.
Mrs. Floyd?
No.
Mr. Frazier?
No.
Ms. Hall?
No.
Mr. Johnson?
No.
Mr. Marmee?
No.
Mr. Rapp?
No.
Mr. Roletta?
No.
Mr. Blake?
No.
And Mr. Bub?
No.
16-02 fails 10-0, but actually passes. Never mind. Next, we'll go to 16-03.
Ordinance 16-03 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, an ordinance amending the property maintenance code for the city of Newark, Ohio to provide standard fees for certain abatement actions.
16-03 will be held for a second reading in 2 weeks, which will be the 21st. Now we go to resolutions on the second reading, 16-14.
Resolution 16-14 by Mr. Marmee, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to prepare and submit an application to the Ohio Development Services Agency for a local government safety capital grant award for fiscal year 2016.
You've heard the second reading of 16-14. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to adopt Resolution 16-14.
Motion by Mr. Marmee, second by Mrs. Floyd. Is there any discussion on 16-14? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
And Mr. Buck?
Yes. 16-14 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 16-15.
Resolution 16-15 by Mr. Frazier, Mr. Marmee, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
You've heard the second reading of 16-15. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to adopt Resolution 16-15.
Motion by Mr. Marmee.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Floyd. Is there any discussion on 16-15? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
And Mr. Buck?
Yes. 16-15 passes 10-0. Next on the second reading, we have 16-16.
Resolution 16-16 by Mr. Rath, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Frazier, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, a resolution authorizing and directing the Director of Public Service to enter into a master land reutilization agreement with the Licking County Land Reutilization Corporation to facilitate the reclamation, reutilization, and rehabilitation of vacant, abandoned, tax foreclosed real property.
Good job. You've heard the second reading of 16-16. What is your wish?
Mr. President.
Mr. Rath.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 16-16.
Motion by Mr. Rath, second by Mr. Cost. Do we have any discussion on 16-16?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
we've discussed this pretty extensively, but this is a great deal for us to join forces with the county and clean up some property.
Any other discussion on 16-16? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
And Mr. Buck?
Yes. 16-16 passes 10-0. Next, we go to resolutions on the first reading, 16-20.
Resolution 16-20 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
16-20 will be held for a second reading for 2 weeks to the 21st. Next, we have 16-21. I'm sorry, did I
The
miss
other
it?
one had that.
I'm sorry.
Mr. President,
Mr. Marmee.
I make a motion to waive the 2-day reading rule on 16-20.
Motion by Mr. Marmee, second by Mrs. Floyd to waive the 2-day reading rule. Mr. Marmee.
This needs to be expedited in order to meet the obligations of the Gen Z to get that money where it needs to go, and also to obtain the vehicle for the, I think this is the ATV.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
Mr. Bub?
Yes. 2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Marmee.
Make a motion to adopt Resolution 16-20.
Motion by Mr. Marmee to adopt 16-20. Second by Mrs. Floyd. Do we have any other discussion on 16-20? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
And Mr. Bub?
Yes.
16-20 passes 10-0. Next on the first reading, we have 16-21.
Resolution 16-21 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, a resolution adopting a statement indicating what services, if any, the City of Newark, Ohio will provide for approximately 2 acres more or less located in Newark Township, a territory proposed for regular annexation and declaring an emergency.
16-21 is on the first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
make a motion to adopt 16-21.
Motion by Mr. Rath. Second by Mr. Cost. Is there any discussion on 16-21?
Mr. President, this is involving the same piece of property that we just voted on. It's a standard procedure just for adopting services for that particular piece of property.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Anyone else? Seeing none, on, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
And Mr. Bub?
Yes.
16-21 passes 10-0. Next on the first reading, we have 16-22.
Resolution 16-22 by Mr. Rath, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, a resolution regarding a buffer zone for the annexation of the approximately 2 acres more or less located in Newark Township and declaring an emergency.
You've heard the first reading of 16-22. It's also an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rath.
make a motion to adopt 16-22.
Motion by Mr. Rath.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Frazier. Is there any discussion on 16-22? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
And Mr. Bub?
Yes.
16-22 passes 10-0. And finally, this evening on the first reading, we have 16-23.
Resolution 16-23 by Mr. Marmee, Mr. Cost, Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for the current expenses of the municipal corporation.
16-23 will be held for 2 weeks for a second reading, for March 21st. And that concludes our legislation this evening. Thank you for your attention. Next on the agenda, we have our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Do we have anyone who would like to speak?
My name is Edward William Butcher, 263 Union Street. I just had an idea, why can't we have a hot music weekend out here in front of the City Hall like we did a long time ago? I do miss that. They play all kinds of country western music, and when I see what I look at, I think it'd be a good idea. And the opportunity forecast is calling mostly sunny skies, more high in mid upper 70s, but Saturday high in your 72. I'll get you the number 10 weather forecast.
Thank you, William. That music weekend is the mayor's responsibility, so we'll have to get it on. Anyone else this evening?
Thank you.
Joseph Hopkinson, 1345 Pembroke Court. Honorable members of Newark City Council, on behalf of a concerned group of residents in the 5th Ward, I hope you can help us resolve an issue of concern. As residents, we've noticed that many drivers are rolling through or disregarding entirely the stop sign at Londondale and Stonewall. Many drivers are also driving well above the posted speed limit. Would it be possible to assign Newark Police Department to observe the intersection and write tickets? We've also heard suggestions of a solar-powered radar reminder unit, but that won't stop drivers from disregarding the stop sign. With no sidewalks on any streets in the area, we'd hate for an accident to occur. I trust you'll use your best judgment and experience to resolve our issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I notice the safety director is taking notes, so thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Mr. Johnson is not here tonight. Our Honorable Law Director, Mr. Sassen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll pass.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Sassen. Mayor Hall.
I will pass, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Hall. Mr. Cost? I will pass. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Mrs. Floyd?
I just want to mention, I've been a member of the Downtown Newark Association for probably as long as I've been on city council, and I have seen it grow as an organization. They now meet and have to add new chairs and tables all the time, and many businesses downtown are involved in trying to make plans for downtown. One thing that has been brought up, and I just want to mention here in a public meeting, is the fact that there are a lot of businesses, particularly on South 3rd Street and on the south side of the square, that are hurting. It was mentioned La Paloma, but I know the Kix Mix bookstore and the Sweet 23 and you know, those places where all the construction is going on. So if you have the opportunity to go to La Paloma and eat, or to, you know, go to those other businesses, it will eventually get to the, you know, the north side of the square and the west side of the square, so eventually everyone will be affected. But anytime I think we can help those businesses, it's to the advantage of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Floyd. Good suggestion. Mr. Frazier?
I'm very excited for the Lincoln County Land Bank. I think that it's a step in the right direction, especially with all the publicity we have around the basket alternatives and ways of solutioning. We want to keep all of our options open, and this is just one of the realm of possibilities for an unknown of what are we going to do with the basket building that was $27 million to build, is now valued at $12 million, and a company that doesn't want it. And so as we look at the realm of possibilities, I've heard a lot of great suggestions from constituents about how to remedy this problem, and I look forward to the administration tackling this issue head on and finding a reasonable solution that works best for the people of Newark. With that, I'm going to call Public Safety Committee, and I will pass.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Ms. Hall?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll pass.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Mr. Johnson?
I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Marlowe?
Thank you, Mr. President. I need to call a Finance Committee meeting. And I would just like to, it's getting that time of the season where potholes seem to come about and rather quickly. I think that we have a great tool that it creates efficiencies. I know I use it as a councilman, that's the C-Click Fix. It streamlines the process because it's not me calling someone who then has to call another person and so on and so forth. If you just go on there, it's very simple to utilize, and they get those reports daily, and they look at those, and I think it's a much more efficient use of our resources and expedites things and helps the city workers as far as being more efficient too. So I encourage everyone to use C-Click Fix, and that way we can get to those potholes. And I keep telling folks, if you don't tell us that they're there, half the time we don't even know that they exist. And with that, I pass.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Mr. Rath?
Call a Service Committee meeting, and with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Mr. Lett?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few comments tonight.
Sure.
First of all, I'd like to thank our safety forces for ensuring a peaceful resolution to the standoff situation today on Mall Street. I'd also like to thank the residents of that neighborhood for their cooperation while that was occurring. Secondly, I've been contacted by some citizens that are concerned about the plans for the square during the courthouse renovation, more specifically the gazebo. Many citizens feel that gazebo is an integral part of the square, so if the gazebo does have to be moved during the renovation, then I believe it should be preserved. We have to cooperate with the county to get the work done, but I think it's reasonable for citizens to expect that after the construction, the gazebo is returned the way it was found. I'd also like to remind anyone that expresses a concern about undesirables hanging around the square that simply removing that gazebo will not solve that problem. I'd also like to say I don't like the word undesirable being used to describe anyone in our community, and all of our citizens have a right to enjoy our downtown. Regardless of their socioeconomic status, let's remember they're people, and undesirable is a very callous and insensitive word to use. I also want to point out that if anyone's causing trouble on the square or breaking the law, I think that problem can be addressed by the grant we received for foot and bike patrols. Again, removing the gazebo is not what will solve or prevent that problem either. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rutter. Mr. Blake?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to, first reflect on, I had a wonderful Saturday, just past Saturday occurred, I went with our police chief, Chief Connell, up to Worcester, Ohio, and it was an amazing conference of law enforcement officials, people in mental health, drug addiction and recovery, and even addicts themselves, people that have some very strong, powerful testimonies. You may recall that Chief Connell's looking into this Perry program, which is being reflected off of a program started in Massachusetts. There's a police department right now that's running it in near Worcester, and then we would be the second police department in the state of Ohio to do this. And I just think that Barry's shown great leadership in trying to connect and partner with all these different social agencies, so that when a person decides that they're ready to give up using drugs, that they can come and surrender themselves and make a change in their lives. So I just want to publicly applaud Chief Connell. I know he's not here tonight, but Director Spurgeon, he represented us well that day. I mean, he always does, but it's just a very, very good big pat on the back for him that day. Then also that same night, Saturday evening, attended the Mental Health Association fundraiser and Job and Jazz, and I thought that was a great evening. So just sort of my whole day was dealing with mental health issues and drug addictions and things, but it's just very exciting to see how different people are ready to focus on this idea of treating drug addicts as patients and wanting to get them help for their disease. And so I just want to publicly make some comments regarding that. This coming, and also, Mr. President, if you want to invite me to that dinner that you got at that auction, I'd be happy to attend.
I was waiting on you to jump in on that. What happened there?
I don't refuse too many meals, so let me know about that. But this coming Saturday, another collaboration within our community is, probably many of you have already heard, is the United Way's Blueprint, which is happening at 9 o'clock at the Newark Library. Here, and so I know Deb Dingus and several other people in our social service agencies, private sector, business sector, people are coming together to focus on issues that United Way funds. And so that meeting is at 9 o'clock Saturday at the library. And I just want to echo the work that David Green is doing with Professor Kaboob. Can't say too much. I'm an alumni of the economics department at Denison University, and so the professor has many credentials, and he's been very well spoken throughout this nation as having accredited work, as having a leader with the Gonzaga Institute, and so his credentials and what he's going to present on Saturday is going to be very, if you do have time, I would encourage you to go. I mean, just not only talking about the livable wage in Central Ohio, but talking about if firms, either public or private firms, if they move from full-time employment to part-time employment, what the economic implications of that is, and just even the unknown effects of moving in that manner. So I would encourage you, if you have time, to go to that talk, to attend that. And then one final thing, I know I'm going long tonight, Mr. President. One final thing is just a really exciting thing is for our Works Museum. Marcia Downs and her team have done a fantastic job ever since she's been the director of the Works. But next week, I believe the mayor is participating, and I know I'm participating in one of the luncheons. But they're having someone from out of the state come and view accreditation. And so I think that's really exciting for our community and for the Works Museum, and that's just another place of pride in our community which we could support. So with that, one final thing. Mr. Mayor, thank you for giving a little background on the appointee, because I've always, ever since I've been on this council, the way we've appointed people, it's like sometimes we just get thrown a name and we don't even know who this person is. So thank you for your comments to share a little bit about the appointment process. I wish it was a little more streamlined, but we just deal with what we got. With that, I'll pass, Mr. President.
Mr. Blake? Mr. Buck?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one item this evening. Just want to honor and recognize the passing of Louis E. Claggett last week. He was 82, made quite an impact in our community. I know many of us sitting up here knew him, so my condolences to the whole Claggett family. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Just a couple bookkeeping things. Our next committee meeting will be the 14th at 5:30 here in this room. Our next full council meeting will be Monday, the 21st at 7 p.m. also here in this room. I guess you can go Saturday at 9 o'clock to Mr. Blake's and then go eat lunch and then go 2 o'clock back to the library to see Mr. Green's, and you'll have your Saturday plan. So, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Rath, second by Mr. Goss. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. We're adjourned.